Last time I saw you, I was staying in your basement.
Yes, you were. And I was telling my roommates that we were doing this conversation. I told them actually to stop by AJ's if they wanted to see you again. They were asking if you were going to stay in our house.
Right,
again.
I will say, I stayed with you because there was a housing shortage issue.
Correct.
And you generously took me in, but I had a really great time. Also, your house is ridiculously nice. Much nicer than what I was dealing with in college, so.
Yeah, we're kind of spoiled as college kids.
Enjoy it.
But congratulations, you're editor-in-chief of The Federalist. How's that going?
It's going great. We just announced this a couple weeks ago. I've been at The Federalist since we started in 2013 and have loved it and loved seeing what we've done and very excited to take the reins here.
What does your role as editor-in-chief look like? Because my understanding of editor-in-chief is maybe like when I was in charge of my school newspaper, and I feel like that's definitely different for The Federalist.
I don't know. It actually is probably the same. I think there's like an editor's club where no matter what it is, like, you know, neighborhood newsletter or large publication, you have some of the same things, overseeing all the other writers, and we have, you know, staff writers, but we also have quite a few contributors who are on the outside, just making sure we're covering all the important things that should be covered, and that's particularly important in our media environment where so many of the large media outlets are just completely out to lunch or just worse on how they report or characterize the news, how they shape narratives, and it's just really important to not just fight against that, but be aggressive in saying what is actually important that's going on in the world, in the country, and so it's fun. We never lack for work.
We're seeing today like such a divide in the media, more of this like this left and this right kind of competing against each other. Where do you think this kind of began, this divide where we have like left-leaning media and right-leaning media?
So in this country, we actually used to have extremely partisan media. If you read the newspapers at the time of the founding, and even for a long period after that, they are extremely partisan. They wear their bias on their sleeves. And then we had this period of time in the middle part of the previous century where we moved to what a lot of people call the American model of journalism, where you aim toward objectivity and you have just this like voice of God with a shared set of facts, and then people can make up their own mind about that shared set of facts. And that was always more an ideal than reality, and a lot of liberal advocacy actually got pushed through this model, and it's just completely fallen apart in recent years as everybody with a pulse understands that the vast majority of our corporate media has a hard left, not just bias, but propaganda approach to talking about really important things, you know, global pandemics or, you know, international affairs or what's happening in the country at any given time.
And the trust in today's media is kind of, I would say, it's not as trustworthy.
Have you noticed that?
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Where do you think this has really come from?
Yeah, so it is off the charts bad for the corporate media. Nobody really trusts them. Only, like, even their numbers aren't great among Democrat or leftist readers. They are the only ones who will report any amount of trust, and that is purely a reflection of the fact that much of the corporate media exists to advance their agenda. So it's not really meaningful in any sense. But yeah, they've completely lost the plot in recent years. They went from some bias, some extreme bias. I always think it's funny that the first Republican president to complain about bias was Dwight Eisenhower. So it's been a long complaint of the Republican Party and conservatives. But in the last several years, it's just become, I mean, they have nothing. They're so much embracing narrative pushing over reporting of facts that there's nothing left.
What is the difference in reporting a narrative as opposed to just reporting truth or facts?
Right. So ideally, you would be just, whatever the thing is that you're writing on, you'd be collecting facts and trying to report them in a way that matched the scenario. And what we've seen happen with our corporate media is that they're not really interested in reporting facts. They're interested in pushing a narrative. They want to push people into doing something. Maybe it is accepting draconian lockdowns as a response to the global pandemic. So rather than just reporting honestly about what we know, what the rates of infection are, what the rates of transmission are, they worry about how reporting facts might affect their real goal, which is to push, lockdowns or to push a shutdown of the economy or to have a certain political aim. And so they shape everything to match the narrative rather than just letting the facts go where they may. And you saw that. We've seen this for years, but particularly, I think, in response to the last couple of years with the global pandemic, there was just an open acceptance of suppressing news for fear of how it might affect political goals, and that's very dangerous. It's important that people, sometimes facts are not fun to deal with. Like, you take, for example, the early days of the global pandemic, there was some concern that maybe the Wuhan Institute of Virology had something to do with the COVID-19, and that was suppressed. That was violently suppressed. You couldn't talk about it, and you could even be banned from social media. And it would have been good to know that that was a logical line of inquiry for foreign policy reasons, for national security reasons, for health reasons. Who knows who would have been saved? It might have affected vaccine development. And yet it took a year for that to be allowed to be discussed. And that was all narrative pushing instead of facts.
And so when we focus on that narrative, you mentioned that it's dangerous to the country. In what ways is it dangerous?
In so many ways, because now you think also of what happened to an entire field, public health professionals, which were largely held in high regard at the time this started. And, I think people understand that public health professionals are like anyone else, that you might believe something to be the case and later you find out it's not true. But because of the way that the media and public health professionals work to kind of suppress information or to push narratives, I think you've seen a decline of trust, not just in the media, but in the public health profession itself. So, this has been a very bad pandemic that we've lived through. It's obviously taken many people's lives. It's injured a lot of people. But it's not the worst thing you could ever imagine happening. And if there were something else unleashed upon the world that was even worse, you can imagine that the last people you might trust would be some of these same professionals that were so wrong in the last couple of years.
Do you think today we value truth and fact reporting as opposed to people who reinforce our opinion?
Yeah, I think it's human nature to want to have your opinions reinforced. I think studies have shown that people very much flock to arguments that support their already held biases. And that's just something that we all deal with, even if we wish that we didn't. And so we can personally work to combat that, or just make sure that we're not just accepting things because it's what we want to believe is true, by going out of our way to seek out other viewpoints and test our ideas against those viewpoints, and just be well read.
Do you think it's possible to be completely objective in journalism, or is there always going to be a little bit of that bias in there?
So when I was starting out, I was trained in that ideal that you are aiming toward objectivity. And I think it's a great way to be trained. You have to work really hard to make sure that you are looking at other viewpoints, including them, questioning your assumptions. And so I think that's important no matter what type of journalist you are. You should always be thinking, what are the different arguments that are out there? I'm not a huge believer in the success of that American model of aiming toward objectivity. I just saw how it didn't work and how it was used to kind of, It was something that made people feel like they were doing something more than they were actually doing something. But I still kind of prefer it to some of the corruption that we've seen recently. I don't know how much you remember what was going on in 2015, 2016.
I was a freshman in high school,
yeah,
so
probably not caring that much
no.
about all of it. But so that was the period where the media just completely got broken. They had been previously claiming that they were nonpartisan and objective.
Yeah.
And with the rise of the Republican presidential primary with Donald Trump, they just completely broke. And they openly admitted that they felt that their job was to interfere in the election, keep him from being elected, portray news in such a way so as to decrease the chances of him being elected, not cover news stories and it just was really bad. And I thought that after that effort failed in 2016, that maybe they would return to this idea of pushing facts instead of narratives, of not having everybody in the newsroom be a crazy left-winger, of promoting people who weren't that way, firing people who were that way. I thought maybe it would be a big wake-up call. And instead, they somehow got worse. I mean,
Right.
2015, 2016 was less bad than the rest of that administration, where they embraced this crazy conspiracy theory. They pushed it. They broke all of their own journalistic standards to push out false, anonymously sourced stories, again, pushing an agenda that was, not one that they should have been pushing. And they just seem to be addicted to failure. And partly because it's lucrative for them. Like, powerful forces like this new model of journalism. I mean, Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. It's a good idea for him,
Right.
as one of the world's wealthiest and most powerful people, to be able to control a major publication. All corporations kind of feel this way. And so they don't care that they're hurting the country, maybe even hurting the world. It's helping them and their bottom line. And so I don't see it changing anytime soon. That's really bad news, but yes.
Great. Well, why did you really get into journalism? Where did you first realize you wanted to get into journalism? Was it because you can see it kind of going down this path and we need people to kind of combat that?
Yeah, it's a good question that I should probably have a good answer to. But I guess I was interested when I was younger. Like, I think I started a school newspaper in elementary school. I was yearbook editor for 2 years in high school. So I was interested in it, but I knew I wanted to become an economist. So I studied economics in school, and that's the road that I thought I was going down. And then I don't really know exactly how it happened, except that everybody I knew who I was friends with, they were journalists, and they really liked their jobs. They weren't paid that much, but they really liked their jobs, and they enjoyed that they could study different things and like cover this topic one day and cover a different topic the next day and interview people. And I thought that it sounded fun. And so I made a go of it, and I loved it. Like, the first time I saw my byline, I was covering the FCC, like the radio and recording industry, and it was a totally boring story, but it was my first byline, and I was totally hooked, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Where was your first byline at?
It was a publication called Radio and Records.
Oh, cool. You've always been pretty transparent about your faith. Have you seen that affect your career or your reporting at all?
It's mostly helped. I'm maybe entirely helped.
Yeah.
So I think that, so I'm Lutheran, and we have certain things that just help us think through how to live our lives. Like, we have a strong views on vocation. Like, you serve God by serving your neighbor. And you have different vocations. Like, you can be a daughter, a wife, a mother, an editor, and you have different roles in each vocation. And as a journalist, your job is to serve others by telling factual things and bringing people into a place where they might not have been able to be before. You cover a congressional hearing, or you cover an event, a protest, and you get this very special role to help other people who couldn't otherwise know about it. And so I like that. I like also a commandment that I struggle with is putting the best construction on what other people are saying. We teach that the commandment against bearing false witness is much more than just not lying, but that you have to really put the best construction on what other people are saying. I obviously fail at that all the time, but I like being reminded of that, so that when I want to go after someone, I think, well, what were they trying to say? And can I articulate that in a fair way and still critique it, but by being as honest as I can be about what they're saying. So.
Do you think your faith has shaped your conservative values, or if that's led you kind of like down this political and into your political beliefs at all?
My husband and I talk all the time about how much the last few years have been very hard for people in Washington, D.C. And I think that they make politics their religion. It's everything for them. And power is everything for a lot of people. And my husband's a journalist also, and we love politics and we're really interested in it, but the core of our lives is in our church and our faith and like the higher things, eternal life. And so what's happening in politics is so much less important than our eternal salvation, and it gives us this balance and perspective that I think helps you just not lose your mind when things are a little bit in turmoil around you, and that has been extremely helpful for us.
And being open about your faith, and then also just talking about politics, you face a lot of criticism. How do you kind of handle that and not bend to what these people are kind of like saying about you or forcing you maybe try to do?
So I don't know. I hear that, but I think actually what I mostly receive from people is just a profound amount of gratitude. Like if you look in my email, it's just full of people saying really nice things. And I think it's about who do you want to be liked by. And I remember when we started the Federalist, someone said that we were dangerous because we didn't want to be liked by the New York Times. And I loved that because so many conservative media people, they're desperate to get hired at the Atlantic. They're desperate to get hired at the New York Times. I don't even understand why you would want those things. I do care about whether average Americans, who I think are the backbone of this country, who have done so much and never get represented in the media. I care what they think. So I like who likes me, and I also like who doesn't like me.
I understand. And I feel like the people that you're looking to like you, those people that you talk about, like the backbone of America, what's the best way for like the average citizen to stay informed in today's political world?
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of effort. It probably always took a lot of effort, but now, because of what we were talking about with the credibility of the media being at an all-time low, people are aware that they can't trust some of the news sources that they'd trusted previously. And so I think it's just important to still get a wide variety of inputs and do as much original viewing of things as you can. Like one thing that's great about the internet and everybody being the reporter is you can kind of like watch a video of a hearing yourself, or you can read an original document yourself and make up your own mind about it. And so for me personally, what I like to read, like the only real big corporate media that I read every day is the Wall Street Journal. I still like it. It's not perfect, but I like it. And then I use Real Clear Politics, which is a web site that kind of covers things from left, center, and right. Kind of puts the best arguments forward from all perspectives, and it updates regularly throughout the day. So I love that. And then I have like a highly curated social media feed where people I trust, I follow. And so I think that's a good thing. Find a voice you trust. Find a voice who's told difficult truths, and just maybe keep listening to them unless they give you a reason to stop.
Speaking of like biases, you've interviewed all types of people. Do you prefer to interview someone who maybe agrees with you politically, or somebody who you kind of oppose in a political way?
It's easier to interview people who you oppose, so I would prefer that. Your questions just come naturally when you're thinking like, they give you an answer and you just instinctively think why that was a wrong answer, so you can kind of navigate it better. It's harder to do when you agree with someone. On the other hand, when someone is, more aligned with you, you kind of can dig deeper in certain ways to flesh out what's going on. But I'm not the world's best interviewer. I've admitted that before, but I've gotten to interview really high-level people, and it's always interesting. But I find it like you have to have a balance between going after the information that you came to get. You're usually there for a reason, but also letting the person that you're interviewing kind of have a say in what they're gonna talk about. I don't like just a completely belligerent interview. I want to really come to understand what it is that they're thinking.
Well, you say you're not the best interviewer, but it's like not every day that I get to ask you for interviewing tips. How do you prepare for an interview?
Oh, so I have interviewed. I mean, it's funny. Like I've done so many interviews now that usually I just think about what it is that my near goal is, which is a story where I probably have a pretty good idea of what it is that I want to find out, and just I plot it out. I practice like what I'm gonna ask. But I also think like if you can interview in person, that is so much better than over the phone. And during COVID times, I've had to do so much over the phone, and you can't get a feel for how comfortable someone is, or when you're in person, you can feel like, do they want to go deeper here? Do they want to, did they pause in a weird way and look a certain directions that that they're thinking about something that you want to interrogate? But I like to also just, if you can interview someone in their office or in their home, I love that because you get little cues about what's important to them, and you just can be more comfortable with them by talking about like, oh, I see that sports jersey. What's that about?
The
And you can
nonverbals.
Yeah.
They're important.
Well, and just kind of treat people as people,
right.
without having to just be there for business. But I think just as much research as you can do beforehand, so that you're not wasting time. And I don't know.
So you've interviewed President Trump, who he's pretty high profile. Do you have like a best Trump story from like that interview?
So I just want to first say that he is the most difficult person in the world to interview.
I'd imagine, yeah.
I mean, he's like, you ask him a question here, and he goes all the way around before getting, and you're kind of trying to bring him back to the thing that
Why
you're
do you think he
trying
does that?
I don't know. He's a really interesting cat. I also think it's weird because he's much nicer in person than he is like on TV. He comes off like a total
yeah, no, I understand.
antagonistic guy. But then when you're in person with him, he's usually just, I don't know, he's much more gentle. I talked to this one reporter who said that most politicians in public, they're kissing babies and they're complimenting your wife, and then in private, they're just jerks. And then Trump is the one who will insult your wife and like attack the baby, but then in private be like really nice. Sorry, but what was your question about?
Best Trump
best
story.
Trump story. I don't know. He's just from the interview perspective, one thing that's interesting is he has his own rules. So, in journalism, you say this is on the record or it's on background. Right. On background. So on the record means you can use it totally and quote the person. And on background means you can use the information, but you can't tie it to the person that you're talking to. And then off the record means it's more like for your own context, you're not supposed to use it. And then people come up with other things that are funny, like deep background, which is like, I really mean don't tie my name to it. But he'll say stuff like, this is off the record, but you can use it.
That's
You're like,
confusing.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
But in a weird way, like the more you're around him, the more you understand exactly what he means. He means that more like his background.
Interesting.
I think. I hope it hasn't been a problem yet thus far. But so I've interviewed him in the Oval Office. I've interviewed him elsewhere in the White House. I've interviewed him at Mar-a-Lago several times. And he's just, like I said, you need a much more tenacious interviewer than I am to have like a fully productive thing. But I've spent a lot of time with him, and I find him to be truly fascinating. He did teach me how to take a picture, which I think is funny. After one of my interviews at Mar-a-Lago for my book on the 2020 election, I had realized like I'd never taken a picture of him, even though I'd never had I'd had many opportunities, but I'd never done it. And so we're walking out of his place, and I said, well, can I take a picture of you? And he said, well, why don't we take one together? And so we take a picture, and his assistant shows him the picture, and he says, I don't like her, and I don't like me. And he's like, let's move over here. So we move over to this other location, we take it, and she shows him, and he says, I like me, I still don't like her. And he's like, I'm gonna teach you how to take a picture. And he gave me all these tips, like you look at what the background is, not just the people who are in the picture.
Right.
He's like, so we wanna have the background be this beautiful Mar-a-Lago estate, with the green grass below us, whatever. And then he was teaching me things like to turn to the side and put my hand on my hip and like put my chin out. And so we take the picture. Oh, and he says, you can trust me, my wife's a supermodel. I was like, I am aware that your wife is a supermodel,
yeah.
Yes. And so his assistant shows him the picture, and he kind of pauses and he says, well, there you go.
What
and
were
it
you
was
thinking
better.
During that?
You know what I was thinking? How am I my age and none of my female friends ever taught me how to take a picture?
Fair enough.
And the former president of the United States is teaching me like really excellent tips on taking pictures. Like it was one of those like absurd moments, but was really funny. And so now I'm still not great at taking pictures, but every time when someone does it, I'm like, okay, wait, hold on. What did, okay. And then I turn to the side.
Do you think interviewing different people like that would be maybe the part you like the best about your job, or I guess what would be the favorite part about your job?
I don't know. I will say, so of all the people, I've loved interviewing presidents. I've had a few former presidents, or current or former presidents, senators. I enjoy senators, but I really enjoy interviewing judges.
Why?
and justices. I think because they don't talk that much to the media. They are very logical in their thinking. It's just interesting. That's the thing I've enjoyed most, is covering federal judges or other judges and just getting a better understanding of their thinking. I think because I'm personally quite interested in the law. So
yeah. When I first met you last spring, you came to my advanced writing class, and the first thing I look is like, does she have a wedding ring? Because I'm interested in knowing, how do you balance kind of like having a family and a high-profile journalism career?
Poorly? No. So my husband is the main person who got me into journalism. We were friends at the time that I followed him into journalism, and he's taught me everything I know. He's with me on everything. And so even to the extent that I would love to not be working so much, and he's always the one encouraging me to get out there and do things, having someone who's fully supportive and a partner is really key. Having a clear understanding of what's most important. So we both work from home, so we're both very involved in our children's lives. We're very involved in our church. And so it's just like natural balance provided by just having people who love you and are with you no matter what's going on politically. I mean, even the fact that there are people I go to church with who are wildly different political viewpoints, and we all love each other and we all work together, and we're, doing the Oktoberfest together or in the church choir together. And it just reminds you of what's actually important versus what people in DC think is important.
And this kind of builds off of that in a way. Do you have advice for young people who are looking to go into a career in journalism?
I mean, that's a broad question. I don't know. Can you narrow it down a little?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm going to be graduating in May. I'm 21 years old, and I ultimately would like to be in DC, and I want to be a journalist coming out of Hillsdale. What would be, I guess, a main takeaway for me as I'm graduating and going out into that world?
Yeah, so I think it's really weird because when I started in journalism, it was a completely different path. It was kind of standard. You start out at a local paper. Like, even if you wanted to do TV journalism, you start at a local TV outlet, and then you slowly worked your way up into the bigger markets, or you figured out what your beat was going to be, and then you just like drilled into that. If you knew you wanted to be a tech reporter for the rest of your life, you could just kind of work your way up that way. And in the last 20 years, everything's kind of fallen apart. There aren't many local media outlets, so there aren't like good ways to start local and then get bigger. I mean, you can still, but it's just so many fewer opportunities on that front, but then so many more opportunities in DC and New York with outlets that have particular perspectives. And so I think just kind of accepting the reality that that's where we are now. Like, there's no mainstream journalism anymore. That's just gone.
Right.
It's all left or right, and that's just the fact. And some people like to claim that they're mainstream. They're not. They're left. And just understanding like what it would mean if you were to go into a left media outlet, and what it would be like, or to go into a right media outlet. And so I think that's one thing, just understanding the reality of the environment. And then the other thing I think is just like experiences everything, and don't worry about making a huge splash right away until you really have like mastered the writing or mastered being on TV. And then you can kind of like get a feel for everything and then go for a big, everyone's different. Some people can make a splash right away, but I think that I've seen a lot of people really want to share their opinions very quickly out of college. And, if you're a Hillsdale educated person, you have well-formed opinions, I get it. But there's something to be said for just humbling yourself to the idea that other people might have something to teach you for the next several years, and just learning the craft, learning the trade, and then going for it.
So yesterday you emailed me, and you're asking me, we were preparing for this, I guess, and I asked you what you were wearing. You suggested to me, I never answered, like a softball t-shirt, that we should wear softball t-shirts. I got you a softball shirt.
Oh.
Since I am on the softball team, so I do hope,
This is
like,
awesome.
if you come back on campus, you would.
We should just put them
you
on
would
right
wear
now.
This.
This is great. I love it.
But
Great.
I did want to give you that.
Great.
So
And this
you
is
can
your
support the
softball team.
This is my softball team.
Great.
I head to Texas tomorrow.
Nice.
Why we're doing this today.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for making time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
This is
thank
awesome.
you. It's wonderful to get to hang out with you.
I have 2 requests.
Yes.
Would you mind signing my rigged book? And then,
Of course.
also, could we get a photo? That's more of my parents' request. They were like, "Can you get a
I know that's cool that you don't want a
that
photo
mine?
with me, but
No,
just
I
your
do,
parents.
but
Just
like,
kidding. I'm
I
joking.
don't.